The first time I saw her cry, she wasn't trying to hide it. It was late, almost midnight, and the hallway light cast a warm, soft glow over the landing. I had just stepped out to grab my charger when I heard the quiet sniffling, low, rhythmic, and so raw it stopped me in my tracks. I turned my head and saw her sitting on the stairs, her arms folded tightly over her knees, her face buried in the crook of her elbow. I didn't say a word. I didn't dare. She looked up, startled, but didn't move. A tear clung to her jaw. Her eyes met mine, rimmed with red, wide open, exposed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice trembling. "Didn't think anyone was still up." I nodded slowly, unsure if I should walk away or go to her. My body chose neither. I stood there in my t-shirt and sweatpants, barefoot on the wood floor, my heart trying to climb its way out of my throat. She gave me a sad smile. "It's just one of those nights, you know?" Yeah, I knew. And I knew somehow that everything between us would be different after this. Her name was Elise. I didn't know that at first. For weeks, I only knew her as Mrs. Vaughn, the landlady of the townhouse I moved into that spring. She lived in the unit next door, a converted duplex with ivy climbing up the brick walls and white lattice fencing that leaned a little from too many winters. I just turned 26 and landed a new job downtown, something in communications that looked better on paper than it felt in practice. The move wasn't planned. My last place was cheap, sure, but noisy, moldy, and full of late-night shouting matches from the neighbors upstairs. I needed quiet. Something stable. Elise's place promised exactly that: clean, well-maintained, private entrance. She'd posted the listing herself on a community board. The ad was short and handwritten, taped under a flyer for lost kittens. I almost missed it. When I came by to view the place, she answered the door wearing a navy blue sweater, her sleeves rolled up to the elbows, and a pencil tucked behind her ear. Her hair was tied back, loosely, like she'd been in the middle of some project and forgot to check the mirror. I remember thinking how unpolished she looked, not sloppy, just real, like someone who wasn't trying to impress you, because she didn't need to. "You're Noah?" she asked, not quite smiling. I nodded. "Yeah, hear about the rental." She stepped aside. "Come in. Shoes off, please." It wasn't what I expected. Most landlords were cold, distant, or too eager. Elise was neither. She didn't give me a sales pitch or drone on about the neighborhood. She pointed out the features quickly: solid wood floors, insulated windows, a radiator that moaned in the mornings but worked fine. Her voice was calm, even, with this dry cadence like she was always 2 steps ahead of you and didn't need to say much to make her point. She had a presence, not loud, but quiet in a way that made you listen more closely. And there was something else, a tiredness behind her eyes that didn't come from lack of sleep. I didn't ask. I signed the lease that same week. She left the keys in my mailbox with a note that read, "Welcome. Let me know if the radiator starts sounding like it's dying. It's not, but it likes attention. Elise Vaughn." For the first few days, I barely saw her. Just the occasional glimpse through her kitchen window, or the sound of her footsteps overhead when I walked past the stairwell. But then there was that Sunday morning, cool and overcast, the kind that makes you think of coffee and second chances, when I stepped outside to find her kneeling by the garden bed between our units, her hands deep in the soil. She looked up at me, strands of hair falling loose from her bun. "Morning," she said, wiping her fingers on her jeans. "You sleep through the trash truck?" I blinked, still groggy. "What?" "They came an hour early. Left half the street behind." "Oh, yeah." I didn't hear a thing. She gave me this half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, then went back to the soil. I lingered a second too long, watching the way she pressed her palms into the earth, slow and deliberate. She moved like someone used to doing things alone, someone who had long ago stopped waiting for help to arrive. From that morning on, we began sharing fragments. A nod in the hallway, a shared glance when the mail came late. Once, I brought in her empty bin from the curb, and the next day she left a folded paper bag on my stoop with 2 homemade muffins inside. Blueberry. We didn't speak much, but when we did, it never felt casual. She asked real questions, listened hard. She never filled silence just to fill it. That quiet between us, it held something. I couldn't name it then, but I felt it in my chest, in the stillness of my evenings, in the way I found myself listening for her footsteps. She was older, obviously. I didn't know by how much, late 30s? Maybe early 40s? Her face didn't give it away. There were lines, sure, but they added something, not took away. And there was a weight to her that didn't come from age, but from having carried things most people don't talk about. I didn't ask about her past. I didn't ask why she never had guests, or why her porch light stayed on all night even though no one came. But I noticed. And sometimes, I think she noticed that I noticed. I remember one evening in particular, cool breeze, dusk settling. I was locking up my bike, and she came out with a glass of wine in one hand and a book in the other. She didn't look at me right away. She just stood there, on her porch, watching the sky bleed into navy. Then, without turning her head, she said softly, "It's the in-between hours I miss most. When the house used to feel full." I looked up, unsure if I was supposed to answer. Her voice was low, steady, but there was something underneath, something like longing. After a few seconds, she looked at me and added, "Sorry. Ignore me. I get nostalgic when the light changes." But I didn't ignore it. I carried it with me the rest of the night. From then on, the quiet between us didn't feel like distance. It felt like a bridge we were both slowly, cautiously crossing. It started with her tea kettle. Late one night, maybe close to midnight, I was lying on my couch trying to fall asleep to the sound of rain tapping against the windows. It had been one of those long, gray days where everything felt 2 shades too quiet. The kind where the world presses in just enough to make your chest feel a little tighter. Then I heard it, soft, rhythmic clinking, like porcelain tapping against the edge of a teacup. I sat up. It was coming from her kitchen. My window faced hers, not directly, but just enough to catch glimpses through the sheer curtain she never fully drew. Through the glow of a single overhead light, I could make out the silhouette of her at the counter, slowly stirring something in a cup. She wasn't talking to anyone, wasn't on the phone. She was just there, still, present in a way that made the silence around her feel like company instead of absence. The next morning, I bumped into her by the mailboxes. "You up late?" I asked, careful with my tone. She didn't pretend not to know what I meant. "Elijah used to work nights," she said, almost absently. "Even after he was gone, I'd stay up, waiting for a sound that wasn't coming." I paused. "Elijah?" She gave a small smile, almost embarrassed. "My son. He passed 5 years ago. Car accident. He was 17. The weight of that sentence landed slowly. Heavy, but offered without drama. "I'm sorry," I said, "because what else do you say?" She nodded. "Thank you. Most people don't bring him up. Like forgetting is the polite thing to do." I didn't know her well. Not really. But something in me tightened at the idea of her sitting alone in that kitchen, remembering someone the world had moved on from. So I said, "You don't seem like someone who wants to forget." And that was it. That was the first time she really looked at me, not just saw me, but looked like I'd said something that chipped away at a wall she didn't even realize she built. Later that week, she knocked on my door. She had 2 mugs in hand. "Chamomile," she said, holding one out to me. "Can't sleep either?" I smiled, stepping aside to let her in. That night, we sat in my kitchen. No background noise. No distractions. Just steam curling up from our mugs and the occasional creak of the radiator. She told me about Elijah, how he loved jazz and hated math. How he never learned to whistle but tried every day. How the last thing she said to him that morning was, "Don't forget your gloves." Not, "I love you," not, "Be careful." Just something small and forgettable that had haunted her for 5 years. "I don't tell many people about him," she admitted. "They get that look in their eyes, like they want to run." "I won't run," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." She didn't answer, just stared into her tea, the corner of her mouth twitching like she was trying not to let something show. From that night on, it became a quiet ritual. Every few days, a knock on the door. Sometimes from her, sometimes from me. We never planned it, never texted ahead. It just happened. We talked about books, about the garden, about silence, grief, loneliness, but never in a sad way. More like 2 people finally letting themselves exhale. And yet, beneath all that softness, something was changing. It was in the way her hand brushed mine once while reaching for a napkin and didn't pull back right away. It was in the way my chest tightened slightly when I heard her laugh, not because it was rare, but because it was real. She was older, yes, and there were things about her I couldn't yet name. But when she spoke, I listened. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Because her voice carried something that felt like a secret kept just for me. One night, she asked if I ever felt lonely in my apartment. I said yes, but it wasn't so bad now. She didn't respond, just gave this small, quiet nod and finished her tea. When she left that night, she lingered at the door a moment longer than usual. Her hand brushed my forearm as she passed. She didn't apologize. I didn't move. After the door closed, I stood there for a long time, hand still warm, heart doing that uneven thing it had started doing lately. the thing that told me this was no longer just about tea. The next time I saw her, she was humming. It was early, too early, and I was out front wrestling with a stubborn lock on my bike chain. The morning air was cold enough to bite through my jacket, and my fingers were stiff with frustration. I just muttered something under my breath when her door creaked open. She stepped out in a long gray cardigan and slippers, holding a watering can, her hair still tousled from sleep. I was sure she hadn't seen me until she started humming. Low, tuneless, absent-minded. Something old, maybe jazz. I froze. It was the kind of sound people only make when they think they're alone. She moved to the garden bed and poured water over the soil like it was muscle memory. A half-empty mug of coffee sat on the porch railing beside her. As she turned, she spotted me, and for a second, something flickered across her face, not embarrassment, exactly, but a kind of self-awareness. "I didn't mean to interrupt your concert," I said, smiling. She didn't laugh, but her lips curved slightly. "You're lucky. I usually save my singing for the dishes." I stood, brushing off my hands. "How do you always look so calm in the mornings?" Her eyes lingered on me. "I don't. I just fake it well." And then she turned back toward the garden, but not before her gaze dipped, quick and unmistakable, to the spot just above my collarbone, where my shirt had slipped open. It was nothing. A fraction of a second. But I felt it. Something changed after that morning. We weren't touching. We weren't even saying anything we hadn't said before. But the air between us had thickened, warmed. It lived in the pauses, the way she waited a heartbeat before answering the door. The way my hand lingered on the kettle when I made tea, hoping she might knock. There was a day, a week later, when the rain came heavy and uninvited. I was working from home, half watching an email draft I couldn't finish, when I heard it, her door again. 3 soft knocks on mine. When I opened it, she stood there, coat damp from the walk over, mascara slightly smudged from the rain. She held a book in one hand, a paperback with a cracked spine. "You mentioned liking Baldwin," she said, holding it out. "This one's marked up." I wrote in the margins. "Hope that's not a deal breaker." I took it from her slowly, careful not to let our fingers brush. "Thank you," I said, quieter than I meant to. She nodded and turned, but stopped before stepping off the stoop. "Do you ever miss people who aren't yours to miss?" she asked. Her voice was low, almost fragile. "I think that's the only kind I ever miss," I said. She didn't smile, but something in her face softened. Then she left. I read the book in 2 days. I underlined passages I didn't understand. I folded corners on pages where her handwriting curved along the margins, sharp and elegant. One note simply read, "He wanted to be good, but she made him feel alive." I didn't sleep that night. The next evening, I waited until I saw her porch light flick on. Then I walked over, heart hammering in my throat, and knocked once. She answered almost immediately, like she'd been standing just on the other side. "I finished it," I said. "And?" she asked. It made me feel like I'd forgotten how to pay attention. She tilted her head, studying me. "To what?" "To the things people don't say out loud." There was a long silence. A quiet held between us like glass. "I'm making soup," she said finally. "Too much for one." I nodded. I could eat. We didn't speak much that night. She chopped carrots. I stirred. We moved around her kitchen in near silence, only the sound of the stovetop and distant thunder filling the gaps. Once, we reached for the same spice jar, and her hand grazed mine. Neither of us pulled away. Later, we ate at the small table by the window. The lights were low. Rain pattered soft against the glass. She didn't ask about my day. I didn't ask about hers. But when she reached to refill my bowl, her sleeve brushed my wrist. She looked up at me then, and for a split second, maybe less, she didn't look away. The silence between us felt like a held breath. We didn't cross any lines. Not that night. Not physically. But in the quiet, something had shifted again. Not a storm. Not a crash. Just a steady tide, pulling us somewhere we both swore we weren't going. That weekend, I left town. My sister was moving apartments across state lines, and I'd promised weeks ago to help her. It wasn't far, just a couple hours up north, but something about the distance felt heavier than it should have. I packed light. Brought the Baldwin novel with me, still lined with Elise's handwriting. I didn't text her. Didn't say I'd be gone. Didn't say I'd be back. I wanted to more than I could admit, but I didn't know what I was asking of her by doing that. So I stayed quiet. Told myself a few days would do us both good. That maybe space would put everything back in its place. But that night in my sister's guest room, I couldn't sleep. The room was too clean. The sheets smelled too new. I lay awake with my fingers on the dog-eared corner of her book, rereading that same line in the margin. He wanted to be good, but she made him feel alive. The words hit differently out there, in someone else's home, surrounded by someone else's version of settled life. I didn't feel good. I felt pulled. When I got back Sunday evening, the air was thick with the smell of early spring damp grass, warm pavement, a hint of jasmine that I hadn't noticed before. Her porch light was on, but dimmer than usual. I lingered by my front steps, key in hand, watching the soft glow behind her curtains. I wondered if she'd heard me pull in, wondered if she'd been listening. Then her door opened. She stepped out slowly, wearing a navy shawl around her shoulders, arms folded. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just looked at me. And I looked right back. "You were gone," she said after a moment. Her voice was steady, but the silence underneath it wasn't. "My sister," I said. "Moving day." She nodded once, like that explained everything and nothing. "I wasn't sure you'd come back." I felt the words like a pin beneath the skin, small, but sharp. "I didn't know I'd miss this place," I said, my voice catching more than I meant it to. "I didn't know I'd miss you." She didn't move, didn't blink, but her fingers clenched slightly at the edges of her shawl. There was a beat, too, and then she said, "Come inside." It wasn't a question. We didn't touch. Not then. We sat in the same chairs as before. She poured tea, lemon balm this time, and we talked about neutral things. Her broken porch step, my sister's tiny kitchen, but every word carried the weight of what we weren't naming. At one point, she set her cup down too fast, and a drop of tea spilled onto her wrist. I instinctively reached across the table, grabbed a napkin, and dabbed it away before I could think. My fingers lingered. She didn't pull back. Her skin was warm, fragile, and underneath it, a tremor. "I used to think," she started, then stopped. "What?" I asked. She looked down. That I'd buried the part of me that still wanted something. I held her gaze. And now, her eyes flicked to my hand, still lightly resting on her wrist, then back to my face. Now I'm not so sure. The silence that followed was long, not uncomfortable, just full. We both knew what this was becoming. It wasn't infatuation, it never had been. It was something quieter, more dangerous. Built not on fantasy, but on hours, glances, shared grief, and steady light. Something born not out of thrill, but hunger. For understanding, for recognition, for warmth. But I also knew the slope we were on. I saw it in the way she looked away sometimes, not out of guilt, but calculation. As if weighing the cost of each moment, each word. She had a life, a history, a boundary she hadn't drawn, but felt obligated to protect. I was younger, yes, but I wasn't blind. That night, I didn't stay long, just long enough for the air between us to pulse with what hadn't happened. At the door, she hesitated. "Do you ever wish it were simpler?" she asked. "Only every time I see you." She looked down, smiled barely. Then she did something she hadn't done before. She leaned forward and pressed her cheek lightly against mine. Not a kiss, just contact. A soft, quiet permission. Her breath grazed my neck. "Good night, Noah," she whispered. And for the first time since this began, I knew, fully, deeply, that we had both stepped across something. The days after that touch felt suspended, like a pause in the middle of a breath. We didn't talk, not with words, anyway. But every time I stepped outside, I found myself listening for her, the creak of her screen door, the hush of slippers across the porch, the sound of water running as she tended her plants. And when I caught glimpses of her, sometimes through the window, sometimes across the hedge, I knew she was aware of me, too. There was a new kind of gravity between us. Not overt, not visible, but undeniable. It wasn't about lust. Not exactly. It was about something quieter, heavier. The kind of ache that starts in your chest and works its way through every unspoken sentence you never dared say aloud. On Thursday, it rained. Not a soft drizzle, but a full downpour, sudden and unrelenting. I had just come back from work, soaked through from the parking lot, when I heard it, a knock. Sharp, urgent. She was standing there in her coat, rain streaking down her face, her hair clinging to her temples. "Elise," I said, startled. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her eyes darting past me like she couldn't quite meet my gaze. "I shouldn't have come over like this." No, it's fine. Come in." She stepped inside, dripping. I grabbed a towel and offered it, and she took it with trembling hands. For a few moments, she didn't speak. She stood there in the middle of my living room, breathing heavily, her coat unbuttoned, her blouse clinging to her frame. "I needed to be somewhere that didn't feel like remembering," she said finally. I nodded. You can always come here. She looked at me then fully, and her face did something I hadn't seen before. It softened and sharpened at once, like a war between restraint and desperation. I've tried, she whispered. Tried to keep this line, this distance. But I keep thinking about your hand on mine, about that night, about every quiet thing we never say. I stepped closer, not enough to touch, just close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off her. Elise, I said, carefully, you don't owe me anything. Not a story, not an apology. But if you need space, I'll give it. If you need presence, I'm here. Whatever this is, I'm not walking into it for the sake of thrill. I'm here because I see you. She inhaled sharply. Her throat worked like she was holding something back. I don't remember the last time someone looked at me like that, she said. Not with desire, with attention. And then, slowly, her hand reached out, tentative, almost unsure, and landed lightly on my chest. Through the thin fabric of my shirt, I could feel the press of her palm. Warm, fragile, real. We stood like that for what felt like a full minute. No words, just breath. Her hand, my heartbeat. Then she stepped back. I should go, she said, her voice low, heavy. You don't have to. She shook her head. I want to. That's the problem. I didn't stop her. I couldn't. She needed to leave on her terms. But the door stayed open a second longer than it needed to after she stepped through. Like she wanted to turn back. Like she almost did. After she left, I sat on the edge of my couch, soaked socks and all, staring at the towel she'd left behind on the table. The weight of that moment sat with me long into the night. This wasn't flirtation. This wasn't some reckless dive into chaos. This was two people, each a little broken, each a little too late, trying to find something still honest in the spaces left behind. She didn't come by the next day, or the day after. I told myself not to wait, but I did. Every hour, every glance at the porch across the way, every moment of stillness in the apartment felt like a held breath. I kept thinking about her hand on my chest, the softness in her voice, the way she said that's the problem, like wanting me was something she needed to apologize for. By Sunday, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I crossed the yard without thinking. No plan, no script, just a need to see her, not to press, not to push, but to make sure she was still there. She answered the door slowly. Her eyes were tired, not red from crying, not puffy from sleep, just worn. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. She stepped aside. Inside, the house smelled like citrus and paper. A half-folded blanket on the couch. A pair of glasses on the table. Her world, so lived in and personal, it felt like walking into the center of a memory. I've been trying not to need anything lately, she said. Her back was to me. She stood by the window, arms folded, watching the sky shift through clouds. I spent years learning how to be alone again. After Elijah, after his father, after every version of life I thought I'd have. I stayed quiet. She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. And then you moved in. That sentence sat in the room like a stone. I didn't come here to confuse things, I said. I came because being near you makes everything else feel quiet. Like I can breathe. She looked at me, and in her eyes was something that broke and gathered at once. I don't know how to be careful with this, she whispered. Then don't, I said. Just be honest. Her lips parted, but the words didn't come right away. Instead, she stepped forward. One step, then another. And when she reached me, she didn't touch. She just stood there, close enough to feel, close enough to fall into. I think about you, she said. More than I should. I hear your footsteps in the hall and my chest tightens. I wait for your knock even when I know it's not coming. I catch myself wishing you'd say something that would make it okay to feel this way. I don't want you to feel anything that hurts, I said. But I do, she said. I hurt because I want something I know I shouldn't. You're younger. You're still building your life. And you're the first thing that's made me feel like I have a life worth building, I said. That stopped her. Her eyes met mine, full and open, and something broke through. Slowly, gently, I reached out. My fingers touched her wrist, the same place I'd dabbed with a napkin what felt like years ago. She didn't pull away. Tell me to go, I said. If you want me to. She didn't. Instead, she leaned forward, and her forehead pressed lightly against mine. Just that. Just closeness. Breath shared. And then, slowly, carefully, she tilted her head and kissed me. Not rushed. Not wild. Just a kiss. One that tasted like restraint and rain and every quiet thing we'd ever wanted to say but hadn't. When we pulled apart, she didn't speak. She just rested her hand on my chest again, feeling the beat underneath, steady and sure. "I don't know where this goes," she said. "Me neither," I replied. "But I want to find out," she said. And so we did. Not quickly, not carelessly. We didn't fall into each other. We unfolded. Over weeks, then months. There were boundaries, fears, late-night talks where she almost pulled away and I almost let her. But each time, we chose to stay. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. Some loves are loud. Ours was quiet, built in silence, sealed with tea and rain, and stitched together by every moment we allowed ourselves to be seen. I still remember that first night after the kiss, how we sat in the dark, side by side on her couch, not needing to fill the space with anything. Because sometimes, the most honest thing in the world is simply staying.